Hello everyone. In previous class we have studied about positive aspects of the globalization and negative aspects of the globalization. We can consider this as the arguments for globalization and arguments against globalization. So you can write your own viewpoint regarding the globalization's arguments for and against both. So in today's class, we are going to speak about the history of the globalization. So when our viewpoint is in the Indian perspective, we can see the globalization is came into existence in the year 1992. If we are considering after the independence, the globalization concept is came into India in the year 1992. But in fact, when we are trading in our older days, in our ancient days and all before Christ periods, there was a international trade and the concept of the globalization is implemented in a different way. Okay, so even when we speak about the international level of the globalizations, we have to start from the before Christ centuries. Okay, so the first century of before Christ, we call it as BC, 5th century of AD. So AD means after the birth of Lord. Okay, so we say it as after Christ. Okay, and 13th and 14th century of AD. So let's see the history of the globalization. It is Silk Roads been around. But as of the first century BC, a remarkable phenomenon occurred. For the first time in the history, luxury products from China started to appear on the edge of the Eurasian continent in Rome. Okay, so the China is started exporting the silk to the Eurasian continent, that is Rome. Okay, so this is the first step of the globalizations which is observed. They got there after being hauled for thousands of miles along with the Silk Roads. Okay, so they used to travel for thousands of the miles, and silk is the costliest material at that time. Okay, so since the roads are used to transport the silk, that is called as the Silk Roads. Okay, trade had stopped being a local or a regional affair and started to become a global. The Silk Road was and is a network of the trade routes connecting east and west. Okay, and was central to the economic, cultural, political, and the religious interactions between these regions from 2nd century BC to the 18th century. Okay, the Silk Road primarily refers to the land, but also sea roads connecting East Asia and South Asia with South Asia, Persia, Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and Southern Europe. Even though this particular point says it is only roads, it doesn't contain only roads. Okay, even there is a sea routes too. The second step which is observed is in the year of 7th to 15th century, and in the next chapter in the trade happened thanks to Islamic merchants. Okay, the Islamic merchants have taken a major role in the spice routes. As new religion spread in all the directions from its Arabian heartland in the 7th century, so did the trade. The founder of the Islam, the Prophet Muhammad, was famously a merchant as well as his wife Khadija. By the early 9th, the Muslim traders already dominated Mediterranean and Indian Ocean trade. Afterwards, they would be found as far as East Indonesia, which over time became a Muslim majority country, and as far west as Mauritius, Spain. Okay, so in the 7th and 15th centuries, we observed that the spices are traded from one country to another country, and the Islamic merchants have taken the major part. Since the Prophet Muhammad and his wife both are merchants, even the followers of the Islam is also excellent in the trade. Okay, so they spread their trades even for India, and afterwards they found Indonesia, one of the island. They focus on the spices mainly traded by a sea. Okay, so the spices are mainly traded by a sea, like a cloves, nutmeg, mace from the fabled spice islands, the Moluku Island in Indonesia, which has high demand and extremely costly. Okay, so this type of the spices from the Moluku Island, one of the island of Indonesia, which has a high demand and extremely costly. Okay, the spices of that particular island is having high demand and it is extremely costly. Globalization still didn't take off. We cannot consider it as a complete globalization, but the original belt means the sea route and the road is a silk road of the trade between east and west did not exist. Then comes the age of discovery in the year of 15th to 18th centuries. It was in this era, from the end of the 15th century onwards, that European explorers connected east and west and accidentally discovered the America. So when you're studying the history and all, the Columbus is discovered the America, aided by the discoveries of so-called scientific revolution and fields of astronomy, mechanics, physics, and shipping. The Portuguese, Spanish, and later the Dutch and the English first discovered, then subjugated, and finally integrated new lands in their economies. Okay, so the Dutchess and Spanish and even English ruled some of the countries, and they are spread their businesses. The first wave of the globalization, we can say it as in the year 1914 or 19th century. This is started to change with the first wave of globalization, which roughly occurred over the century ending in 1914. At the end of the 18th century, Great Britain had started to dominate the world both geographically through the establishment of the British Empire and technologically with innovations like a steam engine and industrial weaving machines and more. It was the era of the first industrial revolution. See, the industrial revolution has encouraged the people to go for the globalization because of the more and more output. Okay, so more output means they can meet the demand of their particular country, and what they should do for the remaining output, they have to export it, right? So the globalization and the international trade has more scope and importance in this particular period. The world wars, it was the situations that was bound to end its a major crisis, and it did. In 1914, the outbreak of the World War brought an end to just about everything burgeoning high society in the West and got on to used, including the globalization. The ravage was completed. Millions of soldiers are died in the battle, millions of the civilians died as a collateral damage. War replaced trade, destruction replaced construction, and countries closed their borders yet again. Okay. So, in the era of this World War, almost the international trade is stopped. Okay, and afterwards slowly they are recovering. In the year of 1919 to 1939, we say it as the interwar period. So the crisis is took place in this period. It's not one or two, multiple countries has faced in multiple times. In the year of 1919, we can say 1921. In the year of 1928, 1931, many countries are faced the financial crisis. Okay, so afterwards, yes, they are trying to improve, and main reason for the crisis is there is no well established international currency. Okay, so and this mode of exchange in the international level is not properly managed or it's not regulated. The second and the third wave of the globalization, the end of the World War II marked a new beginning for the global economy. Under the leadership of the new hegemon, the United States of America, and aided by the technologies of the second industrial revolution, like the car and a plane, global trade started to rise once again. At the first, this is happened in two separate tracks, as the Iron Curtain divided into world into the two spheres of influence. But as of 1989, then Iron Curtain fell, globalization became a truly global phenomenon. Okay, European Union and Bretton Woods systems took part in the international trade, and IMF and IBRD is formed. Okay, so in this particular era after the Second World War, we can say it as the period of the Bretton Woods system. Okay, from the 1944-45 to 19 1968. In fact, some experts says it's till 1973. Okay, so in this particular period, the US took the major role in an international level, and they are trying to fix the problems of the mode of exchange in the international level. Okay, and for them, the industrial revolution and the production of the car, plane has helped, and even the iron production is also helped for them. The globalization 4.0. In a world increasingly dominated by two global powers, the US and China, the new frontier of the globalization is the cyber world. The digital economy in its infancy during the third wave of the globalization is now becoming a force to reckon with. E-commerce, digital services, 3D printing. It is further enabled by artificial intelligence, but threatened by cross-border hacking and cyber attacks. Okay, the major two countries which are dominating the globalization nowadays is the US and China. Okay, and obviously there is a conflict between China and the US every time. The digital economy, as its infancy during the third wave of the globalization, is now becoming a force to reckon through e-commerce. Okay, so nowadays the e-commerce is increasing. The trade of goods and services by using the technology is increasing, right? The digital services, 3D printing, and all of that is increasing. So this is the era of the globalization 4.0. Fine. So this is what the history of the globalization. We have studied Silk roads in first century BC. So BC means the before Christ. Okay, before the birth of the Christ. And spice roads is in between 7th to 15th century. So silk roads are almost the longest route to export the silk from one part of the world to another part of the world. Okay, so this is the connections between eastern countries to the western countries. Spice routes, so this is because of some of the Islamic merchants, okay, who took a major role, and they are trying to sell the spices. Okay, so the Indian spices at that time, in the time of Alexander, in the time of Chandragupta Maurya, and so the Indian spices having the more demand. Okay, so the spices are exported to the Persia and some of the Arabian countries, many more countries. Okay, so at that time also we can observe more and more international trade, and in the year of 7th to 15th centuries, that spice export is increased. So age of the discovery, it is like a scientific revolutions where technology and science took most of the part, and the first wave of the globalizations at the time of 19th century, particularly in the year 1914. And afterwards, the the World War period, 1919 to 1999, that is interwar period, we can say. So at that time, what happened with the international trade, what happened in the international market. So this is what comes under the world wars, and second and third wave of the globalization is just a step by step recovery of the international market. Okay, where the European Union and Bretton Woods system is playing a very important role, and IMF and IBRD are the result of the Bretton Woods system in the year 1955. The globalization 4.0 is nothing but the global era today. Okay, so how the globalization is digitalizing itself.